nothing but Star Wars. Give me the Star Wars. Don't let them end.
Bienvenidos, worldwide fans of our planet's hottest entertainment with an edge from a galaxy far, far away. Jaime En Fuego here, welcoming you once again to my namesake program, Enfuegotainment. That's right, and you can just call me Fuego for short. I'm super stoked that you are here for some brief thoughts as we approach the rise of Skywalker, the end of the saga. My goodness, yes, the release of Episode 9 in just a day or two at this particular point, depending on where you were seeing it. The Hollywood premiere, I think, is about to happen, if I'm not mistaken, this particular evening. But, you know, this week is just, for me, about looking back at my original thoughts of the films, you know, the original trilogy and stuff, since I've already done the prequels, and that's a different bag. We need to basically talk about the original films, how they have changed over the years with their various alterations and releases and stuff like that. Talk about initial impressions of, you know, them in their untainted variety and stuff. And so here we are talking about technically Episode 4, A New Hope, which when it first came out, it was just called Star Wars, you know? Star Wars! Like you guys heard at the beginning with Bill Murray singing and stuff. And despite budgetary issues and, you know, trying to figure things out and not being able to do everything that they wanted to, it still became a major cultural phenomenon. And that's because, you know, despite some of the borrowed ideas, you know, and things of that nature, I mean, George Lucas's epic won notoriety for a legitimate reason. He started out with something more akin to this, you know, with the THX film. And then, yeah, he just, I mean, I don't know. I enjoy American Graffiti, just not as much as others. It's not as much my bag, but still, I mean, he showed versatility as a filmmaker, and so trying to get this magnum opus off the ground, though, that he still claims was originally plotted as 3 separate parts, a middle, a prequel, and a sequel. A lot of speculation about those outlines there, you know, George, and just how much was actually put down. But, you know, nonetheless, my first time seeing Star Wars was definitely not in theaters because I wasn't born until the early 80s, but I discovered them on VHS, and I mean, the merchandising was still going pretty hard when I was a kid, and that was at least becoming aware and cognizant in the mid to late 80s, and so there were toys, there were things that, I think the first time I ever discovered Star Wars toys was when it was the same time I discovered, like, Masters of the Universe toys, and, like, G.I. Joes, and stuff like that, you know, because of the fact that I was over at the Arizona State Fair with my yaya, and, you know, she would take me to, like, the commercial exhibits, and they'd be selling action figures, and so I was like, ooh, that looks cool, I want that, that looks cool, I want that, and so I amassed some of those Star Wars figures, and many of them were, like, resale that weren't even still in their original packaging and stuff like that, and yet that was cool, you know. I mean, I was just a kid who wanted to have weird-looking toys to play with and stuff like that, and so yeah, all of the films had come out, just to be completely transparent, by the time I was born. I was born in 1983. I'm getting up there in years at this particular point. But yeah, by the time I was born, all 3 original films had come out, and so there was this fervent fandom, presumably, and obviously, you know, for more stuff. And you had a few things like, you know, those terrible droids and Ewoks cartoons that I started watching and I still plan on reviewing, but they're rough, you know. And so I guess I even bought these, like, these condensed DVD versions that Lucasfilm put out before the Disney acquisition, and before they, you know, said no, they're not canon, you know, not anything of that variety. But yeah, they condensed particular storylines into, like, a couple separate movies for both the droid stuff and the Ewok stuff. So yeah, those are out of out of print and floating around somewhere, but they're definitely not on Disney Plus, and you'll probably never see them there. Just like you're not gonna, at least in my estimation, see, like, you know, Caravan or Battle for Endor or anything like that on Disney Plus. maybe ever. You know, they were both made for TV. I think they got theatrical releases over in Europe. But so Star Wars, at least as far as the film world, had come full circle by the time I was born and becoming aware of the property through toys, you know, and through merchandising, obviously, which is where Star Wars has gone on to continually make so much of their money, you know, at this particular point. I mean, if I'm saying his, well, it was originally Lucas and now it's the mouse, so, you know, what are you gonna say? But, yeah, my first experience in a theater after all of those VHS viewings of A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi, which is my favorite Star Wars movie ever of all time. I am 100%, I'm Randall, you know, from Clerks. I'm Jedi all the way, man. You know, I am not, well, I still respect Empire. I personally go on to contend that I feel like the Star Wars films got better and better and better over the course of the trilogy. A New Hope, as it later became called, laid the groundwork and was just very prolific in world building, and then in expanding on the ideas, making everything darker and far more interesting. That's obviously what Empire did. And then, yes, Jedi obviously rehashed some ideas with another Death Star and all this different stuff, but I do feel like the cyclical aspect made sense, and for me, it's not even necessarily going against another Death Star. It's the new stuff like Jabba. It's the new stuff like, you know, being on Endor with Ewoks. It's the new stuff like the Emperor. You know, all of that is what really endears the third and final entry of the original trilogy so specifically to me. But if I'm just talking about the first one here, I saw it in theaters for the first time in 1997, if I'm not mistaken, when the special editions started to come out. And the special editions are either loved or hated in a lot of circles. Those who saw them originally really had major qualms. But I will at least go on record to saying I'm not going to have extensive thoughts until I do the Return of the Jedi entry of these three brief little videos here. But I don't really mind a lot of the improvements, you know, that were made here for A New Hope. I don't. And all of these were obviously theatrical precursors to the impending, you know, Phantom Menace Episode 1 and all that stuff that came just a couple years later. But it was, for me as a kid, you know, 97, I was getting a little older by that time. You know, I was 13, you know, almost 14, and I'd been enjoying Star Wars for many years at that point, including, you know, not just action figures, but the books that were coming out, the audio dramas, video games. You know, I'm trying to remember if Dark Forces had come out by that particular point, but I know I had at least played like, you know, X-Wing versus TIE Fighter, or like a Rogue Squadron, and, you know, lots of those computer games. There was a lot of full motion video that they were doing for those. I mean, the Star Wars universe was still very much alive, you know, when stuff like Heir to the Empire hit, you know, with the Thrawn stuff. And I mean, they were very deliberate with, you know, Lucasfilm and everything George Lucas was trying to do with the property in the early 90s as far as keeping it alive, keeping it in the public consciousness, awareness, and expandability aspect. And Dark Horse started doing comics. I mean, there was a lot of really dope stuff going on in the 1990s with Star Wars. And so when I heard the special editions were coming out, there was going to be an added scene or two, there was going to be improvements, you know, with certain visualistic aspects. I was all for it. And while some of the visuals have not aged as well, unfortunately, then obviously Jabba looked really bad initially in that deleted scene that they refactored in and then in turn improved with later versions, you know, like the 2004 release, and then in turn the, you know, the later releases, because there's been so much tinkering, you know, whether it's shoot first, you know, like my shirt, or, you know, whatever else. There's been a lot of different stuff that has been not even so much changed, but tweaked, I think is the best way that I can describe it. And I mean, I would say that the first two are the ones where there's not, I mean, Empire is the one with the least amount of alteration, in my opinion. One has a decent amount of stuff, but Jedi being my favorite with the major change of 2 specific songs that meant a lot to me, that's my biggest gripe that I will continually come back to. But I'm not here to talk about that, I'm going to address those later on. But I'm okay with, dewbacks and, being added and actually moving as opposed to being like just stationary figurines in the background. I'm a little less okay with some of the, poor CGI that you see once you get to Mos Eisley, but I'm glad that they didn't really mess with anything as far as the terrific practical of the creatures once you get inside of the cantina. That was done so well that there really was no need for it. It was really just, when you get to Mos Eisley after, Luke's, aunt and uncle have been killed, and, all of that other stuff that's going on. He's met with, Ben/Obi-Wan, and, they've escaped the Tusken Raiders, and they know the nature of their mission, and all this different stuff, and they're trying to find somebody to get them to Alderaan. I don't mind it as much, silliness of Jabba's being thrown off, big rideable creatures and stuff, but the CGI does look dated. It looks about as dated as stuff that we got around the same time, like, I don't know, The Lost World, Jurassic Park, stuff like that. So it looks decent enough. The motionary aspect, when there's major motion, that's where it does not look quite as good. And that's why, like, you have Stegosauruses in The Lost World that look pretty decent, and I think the dewbacks look pretty good too, but it's when there's like really quick movements and, certain close-ups. And I didn't watch this in 4K though, and that is the one thing that I have seen most of the people griping about, is their like higher definition really calls to attention. If my eyes wouldn't keep contact just disrupting and being nasty. Higher definition, most definitely, especially of the 4K variety. It calls attention to poor CGI because of the fact that everything is so brightly lit. Everything is in, and thank God it's not in like 60 frame rate or something crazy like that. But yes, better looking TVs call more attention to poor digital effects, specifically, and maybe to poor practical as well. But I don't know, the cantina is still dimly lit and everything. So if we're not going to continue along the route of the special effects and stuff like that, I still really enjoyed this story, but it is my least favorite of the 3. I guess just maybe because it's tried and true to a regard. I've seen it so many times, and it just doesn't. I don't know. I mean, there's darkness there and stuff, but Luke is a little whinier. I like dark Luke, battle-hardened Luke, that we get in Return of the Jedi. I like the temptation to the dark side aspect. I mean, there's a lot in the writing in Jedi that I just really enjoy so very much, and yet once again, focus, stay on target. Tusken Raiders, badass. Everything on Tatooine, very fun. I love the Jawa stuff with the droids originally, where they think they're going to die. Cantina's great. McClunky, I don't know about that. One of the newest additions, but there's just so much coolness initially, and then the destruction of Alderaan, Tarkin as a character, the disagreement in the Empire, especially with some of the higher officials, about Vader and his subscription and just belief in these older ideals that, despite not being that far removed, if we're going to look at like actual timeline stuff as things developed, as prequels came out and Clone Wars and more comics and novels and stuff like that, yes, it's not really been that long since there were Jedi around. Now Sith, on the other hand, but there's really no mention of Sith in this film. Man, I should have kept an eye for a specific mention in this upon this rewatch, because I'll be candid and honest, I do not remember if the word Sith is ever mentioned in the original Star Wars movie. I don't think that it is, but please correct me properly if it's not. This is more so Vader being this dark horse of sorts that is on the bad guy side, and yet he is of an elevated power, you know, and there's differing opinions about, you know, whether they should put any stock in his thought process and his intuition. There's no denying the power he possesses, though, which is very interesting that you see all of his interactions with the other Imperials. And that's something that's really cool in this, is the squabbling amongst the bad guys. You know, it's kind of fascinating. You have disagreements on both the light side and the dark side, I guess you could say. But yeah, destruction of Alderaan, heartbreaking, you know, 1,000 voices crying out and being silenced. I really have always adored that line specifically. And then even when they get to, you know, the Death Star and they rescue Leia, you know, was captured by Vader after hiding those plans for the Death Star, which we find a little bit more about in Rogue One, and I love Rogue One. Yeah, they obviously rescue her, and one line that I hadn't really thought about it in forever, and I'm not even sure if I had paid proper enough attention to it, is that even in the first movie, there's a point where they're just about to jump into the garbage chute, and Leia is just really being forceful and badass and everything, and leading the charge and stuff, and, you know, just showing up the men to a degree. And Luke basically asks, and this is verbatim, you know, just like, you know, what do you think of her? And he's like, I don't know, she's an interesting girl. I'm trying to decide if I want to kill her or if I like her, sort of thing. And that's an interesting foreshadowing. I don't know how intentional it was at the time, because the love triangle aspect is really played up in this, as it's played up through at least the beginning of Empire. But, you know, we eventually know what transpires, and yet as far as canon of the films go, we know what didn't last and what's a bummer, and does add some emotional weight to Rise of Skywalker. But yeah, I mean, confrontation with Obi-Wan and with Anakin / Darth, it still really hits home, and just the sadness of, you know, Hamill as Luke, and it's very well put off. And I don't know, our big epic battle that I remember as a kid more so being parodied by The Simpsons than anything else, which is so funny. There was this Simpsons syndication ad in circulation where Bart was Luke, and he was, you know, flying and was about to destroy the Death Star. But that just shows how culturally significant, you know, Star Wars became in the 80s and early 90s, and why people wanted more books, more video games, more all of this stuff, and why George was smart to, for better or for worse, everybody, with prequels and with even the retouching of these original films, why it had to happen and why it was inevitable, because the public wanted it just insanely. And Empire, the next one that I'm going to cover in the video that comes right after this one, is the least tampered with. It's more so just very small, a little bit. I know there's the Boba Fett, you know, like the different voice actor and stuff, but I don't even think that was in the special editions. I think that came after, when Jango's father had an accent, or when Jango, you know, the father in Attack of the Clones had an accent. Anyway, you know, forgo me for that, but there are so many different nuances to the changes, and they were changes to changes and all this other stuff. But as a whole, I will say that these movies needed to be re-released, because I got to see them here in Arizona, in Phoenix, at the Seneca Capri, which was the biggest screen in the entire state. And just to experience that, you know, as a 13-year-old, when I had only been able to see them on my small tube TV, which was like maybe 32 inches, you know, when I was growing up, being able to see them, and see them with additional visual effects and cool little nuances, and, you know, I mean, the explosion does look cooler in my estimation. A lot of people still talk smack about that, you know, the blowing up of the blowing up of Alderaan and the Death Star. Everybody's like, yeah, the additional little visual whateverness. You can kind of see it, but I don't despise it. I don't, you know. Granted, I didn't see it in the original theater, but I did watch it a lot as a kid. And on a big screen with just more shimmer and a little more gloss, I thought it looked cool. So, and this was them kind of sharpening their teeth for, you know, Industrial Light and Magic and all the work that they were going to do on the upcoming prequels. So if I am going to say, as far as special edition versus original, I'm glad and blessed that I tracked down those out-of-print DVDs that have 2 discs, okay? DVDs, not Blu-rays, because the original cuts of these films have never been released in Blu-ray or on 4K, but they were released on DVD. Yes, they indeed were. It was a special edition 2-disc that they did, where disc 1 was, you know, newer version of the film and, you know, all the bonus features and all that cool stuff, but the limited editions of those that have like a little gold foil on the top, I should even show you real quick. Yes, this is the version to track down. Let it focus for a little bit. Focus, focus. Yes, that's the one you want. That is the one you want, and I'll just refocus myself because of the fact that disc 1 is, you know, Star Wars Episode 4. It's got, this is actually relatively devoid of all of the awesome bonus features that you would want. This just has commentary. It's got DVD-ROM, exclusive Star Wars content, widescreen sound, blah, blah, blah. This is essentially something, because disc 2 is the original theatrical version on DVD. This is not just filled with bonus features. And all of that is on, you know, certain VHS releases, all the Blu-ray releases, and, you know, different DVD releases and stuff like that. I don't own any of those, and it's been a hot minute since I have looked at these to realize that these were more so a gimmick to give people probably a ability to have the original untampered films on a higher definition. I'm glad that I own it though, and I'm glad that I took a peek just to see the difference. Yes, I prefer the practicality, but I don't hate on the special editions in the way that so many people do, especially because of the fact that it was my first time experiencing stuff on the big screen. And yes, it hasn't aged as well with some of those alterations, but I don't agree necessarily with some of the gripes people have said about, you know, it's, you know, scum and villainy and all this other stuff, and then you get to Tatooine's, you know, Mos Eisley, you know, port before you enter the cantina, and there's goofy things happening, and oh, it just takes away from the now the bar, the cantina itself is still very intimidating and scary and has great practical there. So I've been Jaime En Fuego. You can find me on all social media sectors like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. I've been doing Star Wars coverage the entire year, just intermittently on and off, which has been a ton of fun. Different novels, different comic books, all kinds of stuff of that particular nature, as well as retro reviews of the prequels 1 through 3. I'm going to be doing just brief little videos like this of A New Hope, of Empire, and of Jedi as, tomorrow night. Tomorrow night! Yeah, that's when I'm seeing Rise of Skywalker. Differing opinions at this particular point that I am obviously apprehensive about, but you know what? I'm going in with my own mindset. I'm going to make my own judgment, and you will see a review immediately afterwards. If you like reviews of stuff that is more of the spectacular variety instead of the sci-fi variety, yes, I am on youtube.com/The Horror Show channel, where we do reviews, we do trailer reactions, we do convention coverage, video game let's plays, all kinds of rad status stuff. Please check that out. And then lastly, every Monday evening, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific, I take part in a program called Show Business with 2 other big-time fans of the stuff in the galaxy far, far away. Lindsay Mimsy from 2 Cents of Nonsense, and CP. It is on his program, his YouTube channel, Willis Credia. We basically talk about box office numbers from the previous week, we look ahead to the upcoming, and we have some discussion about the stories that were the biggest in the last 7 days. So, I'm En Fuego, y'all have been awesome, and until the real of Ka comes around once more, hasta luego, Cinemigos, but I am hopeful that this palaver returns sooner rather than later, and until then, may the Force be with you, all of you.